Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining our webinar. This webinar is with the National Petroleum Authority. It's to give our stakeholders a chance to ask the NPA some of their pressing questions around regulatory enforcement across the petroleum sector. So I'll just introduce our guest speaker, the CEO of the National Petroleum Authority, Dr. Mustafa Abdul Hamid. And I'll give a brief background and then he'll start with the presentation. So our special guest is Dr. Mustafa Abdul Hamid. He was elected as the president of the African Refiners and Distributors Association in March 2023. He's presently the chief executive officer of the National Petroleum Authority, a role he's been in since July 2021. Prior to becoming the NPA CEO, Dr. Abdul Hamid was the Minister for Inner City and Zongo Development from September 18th to January 2021, where he initiated schemes to improve upon the economic and social lives of low-income communities. He was also the Minister of Information and Presidential Spokesperson from January 2017 to August 2018 as a cabinet minister responsible for all government communications. Dr. Abdul Hamid has initiated and implemented a number of significant reforms in the Ghana petroleum downstream industry since his appointment as NPA CEO. He initiated the repeal and replacement of the NPA Act to improve upon regulatory efficiency and also facilitated the implementation of a Ghanaian content policy for the petroleum downstream industry in Ghana. In addition, he has initiated significant reforms to ensure the financial sustainability of the industry in Ghana and deepened international collaborations to promote petroleum product exports from Ghana towards the achievement of the petroleum hub vision of the country. Dr. Abdul Hamid is also a senior lecturer at the Department of Religion and Human Values at the University of Cape Coast and has published widely in scholarly journals worldwide. He has a reputation for upholding honesty and integrity in his public life. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree, Master of Philosophy degree, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamid, for being our special guest on this call. I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to the audience. Since it's a virtual engagement and I cannot see everybody, I would say, as they usually say, that all the protocols are duly observed. And therefore, I would go straight to the point. So we have our topic for today, building consistency in regulatory enforcement in the downstream petroleum sector. So my presentation has the following outline. An introduction. I'll talk about our downstream regulatory mandate. I'll talk about the deregulation of the downstream petroleum industry in Ghana. I'll talk about our licensing categories. In other words, what business opportunities are available for those who want to do business in the downstream petroleum industry, and therefore the requirements that people need to meet in order to qualify for licenses to operate in our sector. I'll talk about our Ghanaian content regulation, which has come into effect. Ghanaian content is the same as local content everywhere else, but sort of say local content, we prefer to call it Ghanaian content. I'll talk about our pricing structure and how, per our regulatory mandate, we aim to help investors to recover or to recoup their investments to the fullest extent possible. What we are doing now and what our focus for the future would be. So to go straight to the point, generally around the world, as we know, the petroleum sector is divided into upstream, downstream, and midstream. But generally in Ghana, for our purposes, we generally talk about the upstream and the downstream. In the downstream petroleum sector, the regulator is the National Petroleum Authority. And in our definition of what the downstream constitutes, it includes anything from the importation of products, if it is crude or refined. If it is crude, of course, it is being imported for purposes of refining. If it is refined petroleum products also, that's also within our purview. Now, we also deal with issues of storage, transmission, or transportation, if you want, all the way to marketing and retail. So all the series of activities that take place between importation and refinery, all the way to the point where consumers make use of petroleum products, is the purview of the National Petroleum Authority. I've already talked about the division of the downstream and upstream petroleum sector within Ghana's energy framework. The National Petroleum Authority, as presently constituted, came into effect by law per the NPA Act of 2005, known as Act 691. The NPA was set out as a semi-autonomous agency to monitor, oversee, and regulate all activities within the downstream petroleum sector. I've already talked about all of the things that you see on the screen presently, from shipping to refining to storage to retail. And therefore, all of these products that power aviation, mining, bunkering, etc., all fall within the purview of the National Petroleum Authority. I've been talking about imports, but it's important to also mention that from our counterparts in the Sahelian region, because they are landlocked and do not have access to port facilities, especially for Burkina Faso, sometimes even of Mali, their products come through Ghana. And because they have different specifications of fuel that they consume from that which is in Ghana, is the duty of the National Petroleum Authority to, if you want, police the process of exporting products to our Sahelian neighbors, especially Burkina Faso. They have an agency that is stationed here in Ghana called SONABI, which is the institution in Burkina Faso responsible for the importation of petroleum products. We work closely with SONABI, and with that, we ensure that products also go to Burkina Faso. And therefore, we have infrastructure facilities that we oversee: refineries, gas processing plants. We currently have 4 refineries in Ghana: Akwaba, Platon, Tema Oil Refinery, and Sentio Oil Refinery. We have the gas processing plant at Atuabo, which is under the purview of the Ghana Gas Company. We have over 5,000 retail outlets for the marketing of petroleum products in Ghana. We have a very important institution in Ghana called the Bulk Oil Storage and Transportation Company, which is the government institution that basically owns and operates our petroleum transportation infrastructure on behalf of government. And some of our petroleum products are transported either through barges, through BRVs, or through pipelines. Generally, in Ghana, we consume something between 4.5 million to 5 million metric tons of petroleum products per annum. So that basically is setting, if you want, the structure for how NPA does its regulatory work. Now, I said to you that the National Petroleum Authority Act 691 clearly says that our duty is to ensure 1, effective; 2, efficient; 3, timely. So the effective, efficient, and timely delivery of quality petroleum products. So I'm emphasizing effectiveness, I'm emphasizing efficiency, I'm emphasizing timeliness or timeousness, and then I'm also emphasizing quality. Now, if you flesh out all of these, then you get the various directorates that help the chief executive of the authority to execute the mandate of the authority. So to that extent, we have about 4, or even if you want 5, technical directorates that we work with here in that sense. We have the UPPF directorate, we have the licensing directorate, we have inspections and monitoring, and then we have the gas directorate. Now, what these directorates do is that, so for licensing, through the NPA Act and all the other legislative instruments that emanate out of the Act, sets out licensing requirements the fee regime or licensing fee regime. It fleshes out the sanctions regime for violations of licensing regulations, and etc., etc. So anybody who wants to do anything within the downstream petroleum industry, whether to set up a refinery, even establish a filling or service station, establish storage facilities, pipeline facilities, etc., will have to come to the NPA for licensing. We have our Economic Regulation and Planning Directorate that helps with the regulation of the economic regulation of the sector in terms of not just pricing of petroleum products, but also of placing value on depot facilities and other such facilities that are used and patronized by actors in the downstream petroleum sector. Since 2015, Ghana has gone full deregulation. So under a deregulated regime, government no longer fixes the prices of petroleum products. These are basically determined by the forces of demand and supply. And if you want, to this day, all the other ancillary factors like exchange rate volatilities, international oil prices, suppliers premium, freight insurance, all of those things. But however, what our Economic Regulation Directorate does is to ensure that people are pricing within reasonable range. Initially, we used not to have a floor pricing. We only had a pricing for the upper limit or the ceiling. But of late, for BIDEX or import and export companies, we have set out a floor, for also ensuring fair competition among actors and players. The Unified Petroleum Price Fund is the fund that helps us to ensure that transporters of petroleum products across the country do not slap the cost of transportation on petroleum products, such that across the country, people buy petroleum products at, if you want, the same price, fairly the same price. That unlike cement or iron rods or some other products, they don't cost more as you go up country versus what pertains down country, because transporters of cement, iron rod, etc., will slap the cost of transportation on the petroleum products. Now, to do that, we put a certain fee, or what we call here margin, on the cost of petroleum products that are bought by Ghanaians. So to this day, it's about 90 pesos on each liter of petroleum product that a Ghanaian buys is set aside and put into the Unified Petroleum Price Fund, which is then used to offset the cost of transporting petroleum products across the country. I've already talked about how we moved through, if you want, a gradual deregulation process to full deregulation in 2015. We have a wide range of licensing categories, which is the one I'm projecting currently on the screen. Refinery. We recently created a category, and if there are any people from Vitol and BP in particular, they will see that we created a special category because of the challenges of COVID, Ukraine war, exchange rate volatilities. We created a special international oil trading company license, which used not to exist before, in order to ensure the continued supply of petroleum products in our country. I've talked about BIDEX or BDC license. Now we are doing something we call the cylinder recirculation model. Hitherto, Ghana has operated what I'll call a filling station concept in regards to LPG, where people go to filling stations to go and fill their empty cylinders. Because of the hazards associated with that practice, we've sought to phase it out and introduce a cylinder recirculation model where people just go to exchange points and then exchange their empty cylinders for filled cylinders. Now, under that, we now have bottling plants where these cylinders are bottled and taken to storage depots, and then from there to exchange points. So we now have storage depot licenses, bottling plant licenses, including all of the other licenses that already existed, LPG marketing company licenses, and etc., etc. So those are all the licenses that you see currently being projected. Now, under our Ghanaian content regulation, which I said just came into effect, our aim is to reserve operations in the downstream petroleum industry, especially activities that are related to marketing and retail of petroleum products solely to Ghanaians, and to allow for foreign participation only in aspects of the downstream petroleum industry that require heavy capital, or if you want, heavy investments. And so we have passed the Ghanaian content law. Cabinet has approved of it, where we are now saying that in relation to the marketing of petroleum products, only Ghanaians can participate. Foreigners can continue to participate, or even if you want, solely establish refineries, if you want, depots, pipeline infrastructure, all of those things that Ghanaian citizens may not have the capacity to invest in. You can also come by way of a joint ventureship, with a Ghanaian. But under our joint ventureship arrangements, we require that Ghanaian holders or shareholders of any such business will have the majority shareholding of at least 51%. So like I said, if it comes to things like marketing, procurement of goods and services, etc., etc., and this is across the entire petroleum sector. It's not just exclusively a downstream phenomenon. In the upstream, for example, there are requirements for people, because of course for the upstream is very foreign dominated, because of the extent of capital that is required for operating in the upstream. But there are still aspects of the upstream that require exclusive Ghanaian participation. How many indigenous, or even if you want, how many Ghanaians should be employed in what sector, and etc., etc. Even for refineries, if a foreigner was to come and establish a refinery, we would have a quota for them in respect of the management, middle-level personnel, and also low-level personnel of an entity like a refinery. So for some of the major licensing requirements that we have, we will require a foreigner participating in a downstream petroleum industry, in fact, well, not just foreigners, but even Ghanaians, to present a 5-year detailed business plan that details the description of your business, the nature of your business, your management and organization. You have to give us a risk analysis, give us a market analysis, and give us all of the projections that will convince us that you are going to be profitable. And we require these things because there are also tax implications, or if you want, revenue implications for government, in terms of the taxes that government collects, in terms of the margins and levies that government collects. In addition to that, you would require other licenses from other important agencies, like the local authority within whose area of authority or jurisdiction that you seek to establish the facility for dealing in the downstream petroleum sector. So, for example, Sentio Refinery, which is situated in the Tema Enclave, would have been required to seek permission from the Tema Metropolitan Authority, for example. First of all, you have to acquire the land per our land ownership and land tenure regulations, deal with the traditional authority that owns the land You would have to deal with Environmental Protection Agency for an EPA permit. You would have to deal with the fire service because it's petroleum. You would have to convince us that there are no hazards or potential hazards or potential fire hazards for that matter, and etc. etc. Now, however, we recognize that it can become cumbersome. And quite frankly, for several years, Ghana had not been doing well in the ease of doing business index anytime these indexes are published worldwide. So we have a certain arrangement where we bring all of these actors together in one place so that an investor doesn't have to go chasing a permit at an environmental protection agency, and then when they are done, they go to fire service, and when they are done, they go to another agency and another agency. It makes the establishment of business cumbersome. And so we have a certain multi-stakeholder committee, for example, that deals with all of these issues in one go. So around that table in the multi-stakeholder committee will be MPA representation, fire service representation, EPA representation, and such other bodies as may be relevant for the issuance of a particular license. Now, I'm sure you have heard that Ghana is trying to establish a petroleum hub on its shores. Nigeria actually thinks that we are rather too audacious, or even as somebody will say, we are punching above our weight by trying to be the ones that would establish a petroleum hub either in West Africa or in Africa. But we are doing it nonetheless. It's a $60 million investment. Is it 60 billion or million? 60 billion investment package that we are seeking for establishing an integrated petroleum hub in the western enclave of our country. Fortunately for Ghana, we've been able to secure the requisite funding for establishing the first phase of that project. So it's a 3-phase, 20 billion, 20 billion, and 20 billion. Each phase would entail the establishment of about 300,000 barrels per day refinery. To make it easy for investors to come and invest in the petroleum hub, like we have said, we've decided to create a one-stop, if you want, station, for the acquisition of these licenses under the guidance of the Petroleum Hub Development Corporation, in order to ease the burden that people have in seeking licenses to establish businesses in Ghana. Generally, let me say, for the MPA, there's a Nigerian proverb that says that the lizard that falls from the high Iroko tree will praise itself if no one else did. From my experiences with the National Petroleum Authority as chief executive since 2021, the National Petroleum Authority has been very proactive, in either its flexibility in easing licensing requirements, in easing regulatory requirements and strictures, to allow for dealing with emergency, for example. So, for example, we now have in place a tender program for the landing of LPG in Ghana, okay? But because we envisage that getting to the Christmas season in Ghana, for example, there tends to be high demand for LPG, and that sometimes what we land through the tender program may not necessarily suffice for what is demanded by the Ghanaian people. We create a window of opportunity for people to import outside of the tender framework. I already talked about how during COVID or in the immediate post-COVID era, and also to deal with the volatility of our currency, we introduced a special international oil trading company license for all our international partners like Vitol, BP, and the rest of them, to be able to land products directly in country rather than the standard practice where they have to terminate at the shore and then sell to BDCs and so on and so forth. We allow them to bring products intact. And that's an innovation, or these are innovations that NPA, constantly monitoring the environment, comes up with in order to allow for flexibility. And I say these things because I know that businesses don't like, I don't want to say businesses don't like regulation, but they don't like too much regulation, even though it is debatable what too much is and what is not too much. And so we try as much as possible not to be on the necks of business people, or not to regulate in such a way that business people feel suffocated, and so on. But to regulate in such a way that we do not allow people to perpetuate anti-competition practices or monopolies or form cartels, or, if you want, undercut the market in order to make profits at the expense of other competitors and so on. So our business has been generally to ensure fair regulation, for all of our participants. And I've already talked about the fact that since we went full deregulation, our aim has been to allow people, to the fullest extent possible, to recover their investments and so on. So if you look at our pricing structure, I'm saying that our objectives are: number one, full cost recovery at import parity, revenue generation through taxes and levies, and then uniform pricing through the Uniform Petroleum Price Fund. And so we would have a formula based on ex-refinery, the freight on board, plus a supplier's premium. And then when you come to the delivery of the product to the final consumer, will be made up of ex-pump, ex-ref, taxes, levies, and margins, and et cetera, et cetera. I must also say that as a regulator, because we are sensitive to people's businesses, because in any event, the majority of people, indeed the overwhelming majority of people who are employed in our sector in particular, are Ghanaians. And so NPA is very pro-business in its regulatory, in exercise of its regulatory mandate or powers, such that we can protect Ghanaian businesses and protect Ghanaian employees, so that the private sector, the downstream petroleum sector, can grow and employ more people and ease the burden of unemployment, which is the burden of many African societies, or indeed all societies across the world. And so we try to cushion people. And so sometimes we have directly appealed to government to introduce certain economic measures that seek to protect people's businesses, especially in times of volatility, turbulence, as we saw in the COVID era. So for Bidex, for example, we got the Bank of Ghana to do a forex auction, for example, for Bidex in Ghana. Under normal circumstances, that should not be our business. But I'm saying that if businesses are not thriving in the downstream petroleum sector, who do we regulate? we are regulators. We exist because there are thriving businesses to regulate in the first place. And so we require, as a country, 400 million United States dollars every month for the importation of petroleum products. It's difficult to... So because of that, I mean, and of course, I'm talking about a country where pharmaceutical products are imported, rice is imported, oil is imported, a lot of things are imported. And so because of that, all these importers are constantly chasing the dollar in order to do business. And that puts pressure on the cedi, and then our currency is constantly plummeting. And so because of the constant plummeting of the cedi, which affects investments, which affects prices and so on, we appeal to the Bank of Ghana. I think this started somewhere around the beginning of 2022, where we do a forex auction to guarantee a certain stable exchange rate for petroleum importers, so that we don't unnecessarily burden the final consumer. To this day, the forex auction still goes on, even though the volume, the percentage of foreign currency that is provided by the bank that has dwindled from nearly 50%. We've come down and doing now about 30%, and then they still have to go to the open market to look for the 70%. We also introduced our gold for oil program in order to reduce the demand for dollars for the importation of petroleum products. Fortunately for us, our international partners, some of our international oil trading companies, were amenable to the idea of using our gold resources as a buffer, for the supply of our petroleum products rather than hard dollars, if I may put it that way. With our petroleum price structure, as I have already said, beyond the ex-refinery price, we also, Ghana government slaps certain taxes and levies on the cost of petroleum products in order, of course, to raise revenue for the state, either for a specific purpose or for general developmental purposes. So, for example, we have a sanitation and pollution levy, which is a 10% component of the cost of petroleum products, which is used for dealing with the sanitation challenges that we have in our country. BOST has a margin of about 9 pesos, and by BOST, I mean the Bulk Oil Storage and Transportation Company, that it uses either to maintain its infrastructure, improve infrastructure, and improve generally the storage and delivery of petroleum products across the country. The UPPF, I've already spoken about it and how that helps us to take out the cost of transportation or prevent the cost of transportation being slapped on petroleum products. So I'll move to, I've already talked about our safety standards, you call them housekeeping rules that allows us to maintain general safety within our petroleum industry. Tomorrow, I'm being invited by one of our depots to a celebration of 2,000 hours without lost time injuries, for example, because our Inspections and Monitoring Directorate is very rigorous in ensuring that depots, petroleum facilities adhere to safety standards so that we can prevent, or even if you want, minimize accidents as much as possible. NPA is going through regulatory processes right now to certify, to get ISO certification, let me put it that way, for the key areas of our regulatory mandate. It's our hope that by the end of the year, we will obtain full ISO specification for our quality management system, our environmental management systems, and for our occupational health and safety management. Now, moving forward, what are we doing to improve on, as I said, effective, efficient, timeous delivery of quality petroleum products to the Ghanaian people? We've introduced a lot of technological innovation in our operations. We have a system we call the ERDMS. For those who are operators in our sector who are on this call, they know what I mean by the ERDMS, the Enterprise Relational Data Management System, that allows us visibility in terms of the products that are loaded and sold, which then helps with taxation purposes and etc. So we have an automatic time gauging system that allows us visibility of various petroleum outlets across the country, such that we are able to know beforehand where in Ghana there are likely to be shortage of petroleum products that we can make an intervention in. Our Quality Assurance Directorate has all the modern gadgets for the testing of petroleum products. We have an arrangement with a local company called the Nationwide Technologies that does the fuel marking program that helps us to determine whether a particular petroleum product comes from the right source or not. I have said that we are, as it were, about to review the National Petroleum Authority Act. It is in Parliament. The life of this Parliament is about to expire. If it doesn't get passed in the life of this Parliament, it will be reintroduced in the next Parliament from January, where our business in this particular review of the Act is to strengthen the UPPF, PDM, all the processes, the distribution funds that we have, strengthen them, make them better, make them stronger, to ensure that we continue to deliver on fuel across the country. From the slide that we are looking at, I've already talked about price deregulation. And under our price deregulation review, is something that we constantly review anyway. So, for example, before now, no OMC, for example, was allowed to sell at a different price in one region and sell at a different price in another region, for example. So if you were Goil and you were selling at 14 cedis per liter, you were required to sell at 14 cedis per liter across all your stations. But as I said, because of NPA's flexibility, we've looked at it and decided that, look, depending on the conditions that exist in another region, you can tweak your pricing. And that's why we introduced the price floor, so that people don't also drop their prices too much in order to undercut competition. I've already talked about the ERDMS, depot operations. We have talked about the cargo tracking systems, etc., etc. We have a zonalization program that's based. So that's why I talked about PDM. PDM means primary distribution margin versus UPPF margin. So with the primary distribution, that's what we take the product from our primary depots, mostly in the Accra Tema enclave, to our secondary depots in the various regions, like the Western region, in Ashanti, in Kumasi, in Bolgatanga, and Depe, where retailers will then have to load the products from these secondary depots to the various outlets. I've talked about the cylinder recirculation model. So far, we've issued 4 bottling company licenses. 2 are up and running. And so the CRM is operational already in Greater Accra, in the Eastern region, and in the Ashanti region. I'm from the North, so permit me to say I'm wooing investors to try and go to the North who would want to go and establish bottling plants in the North as well, so that if we say that gas is the transition fuel, we really would ensure that people have access to clean cooking through LPG, make it easily affordable and accessible. The government has its own LPG for development program, which is not the purview of my talk this afternoon. Part of the review of the NPA Act is to make room for biofuel, a regime for biofuel blends, a regime for regulating bitumen, and such other products, that CNG for transportation. All of those things are things that the new NPA Act will cater for. So these are basically, to conclude, the areas of our focus in the next year going forward. Efficient pricing, security of products, quality assurance, which are all of the things that I have already talked about. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa Amin. We're grateful for your insightful presentation. You've given us an operational structure of how NP works. You talked about the licensing regime. You've also talked about what you are doing. One of them is the NP Act, which is currently before Parliament. You also talked about the pricing structure and what your next steps are. So I'm going to ask a few questions and also take questions from the chat box. So my first one borders on the local content policy. Can you give us an update as to where we are? Has the law been formally been passed, like we see in the power sector or the mining sector, or probably the petroleum upstream sector? What is the state of the local content in NPA?
Well, right now it is effective and running. You know, hitherto we hit a snag because when cabinet approved the local content policy for the downstream petroleum, and incidentally, I was in cabinet at the time when we passed the local content, or even if you want the Ghanaian content policy in 2018. It was supposed to create uniformity in the entire petroleum sector because, like I said, there's already an active Ghanaian content policy for the upstream. So we needed to do same for the downstream in order to ensure uniformity. But it hit a snag because the Attorney General advised that the National Petroleum Authority Act of 2005, which is the operational act by which we do our work, did not envisage this. And that if we wanted to do the Ghanaian content policy, then we needed to amend certain aspects of the National Petroleum Act. I think somewhere in section 12 of the National Petroleum Act to allow for, if you want, the legal rollout of a Ghanaian policy. So that amendment was done. So to the extent that it was done, that then paved the way for the policy to be in effect or to come into effect. So yes, as we speak, the policy is in effect. And I've already, in my exposition earlier on, told you what the purpose of the policy is. Basically, to ensure the participation or even fair participation of Ghanaians in the sector.
Just to follow up, I heard that you talked about marketing and retail is being reserved for Ghanaians.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, what about those companies that were proud to this local content regulation or act, had invested in retail sector? I mean, we could talk about probably Vivo Energy, we could talk about probably Vitol, we could talk about BP who are doing downstream. Is there any transitional arrangement for such companies?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So we recognize that it's unfair. Let me put it that way, for want of a better term. It would be unfair to just ask them to close shop in the retail business and exit. Let me just also add that generally, the Ghanaian content policy is in line with Ghana's trade policy generally. It's not just even about petroleum, it's with trade generally. So even if you go to Makola, a Chinese man is not supposed to be selling cloth at Makola, for example. A Chinese man can come and establish a cloth manufacturing company and manufacture cloth, but cannot then go to Makola and retail the cloth that it produces in its factory. So let me also make the point that Ghana's trade laws generally encourages Ghanaian participation to the fullest extent possible in retail trade. So for those that are already in, what we are doing over the years to ease them out is that, so for example, we won't issue any more licenses for them to establish any more retail outlet, okay? Because then that will be either expanding or accentuating their presence in the sector. But for those that they have now, they keep them, they do their trading, and then as the years go by, we encourage them to ease out and sell to Ghanaian interest. To be honest, we haven't set a deadline. I can't say that this easing out should occur in the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or whatever. I'm sure that decision is yet to be taken. But for now, they are allowed to operate because they were already here before the coming into effect of the Ghanaian policy, Ghanaian content policy.
All right. Sorry to pick on that, but in my experience as a lawyer, I know most of these multinational companies want clarity and they want legal certainty. So if a law says that they cannot operate in that sector and there are no deadlines, it's quite tricky for them. You know, I was expecting that possibly there will be specific transitional provision to say that probably you have up to 5 years, 10 years to,
ease out,
change your mind. That was very possible in the power sector. In the power sector, there were specific deadlines, specific years to make sure that at each layer there's compliance. So I was thinking similar one will be taken, but maybe something that could be looked at since the law is the new act, the substantive act is going to Parliament, so that it brings legal certainty to these multinationals that have a vested rights in the country. Just by way of suggestion, and not to belittle the point, but just by way of suggestion.
Yeah, I get that. So what it is that we will do that. But you remember I said in my main presentation that NPA's attitude towards regulation, or even if you want, the government's attitude towards regulation is also about engagement. You know, we do our regulation in such a way that we don't just impose deadlines, mandates, ultimatums, etc., etc. So we still have a conversation. I remember the last Minister for Energy, Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, even engaged the embassies of the countries where these foreign companies are headquartered, you know, as part of the dialogue process that will lead to this easing out, so that if you want, people don't feel antagonized, because you also want foreign collaboration. That's how the world is. We talk about a globalized world. There really is no way that you can build a Berlin Wall around yourself and assume that you don't need foreign participation. So all of those discussions are still going on. And then I'm sure at the end of those conversations with these foreign entities and foreign companies, we will all come to an amicable place. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Doc, for such an assurance. I would like to ask about how do you ensure that there's consistency with licenses and operationalizing standards, because you have multiple service providers. So how do you ensure that, someone operating the gas sector, someone operating the storage sector, or probably haulage, or probably retailing? How do we ensure that there's consistency in the licensing regime as well as operational standards?
Well, I don't know what you mean by consistency, but every sector, so each of these units of the sector that you have mentioned also have their unique qualities. Okay, so transporters, for example, the Tanker Owners Union, which is the union of transporters that we have in Ghana, Association of Oil Marketing Companies, which is the association of marketing companies, even LPG, even under AOMC, there's also the LPG Marketers Association called the LPGMC. Now, the storage company, the BDC, the OMC, even though they all are interconnected and form the downstream petroleum industry, they all have their unique qualities. And so if my understanding of your question is, if my understanding of consistency in your context is correct, there cannot be, or in that sense, I'm understanding consistency to mean uniformity. There cannot be uniform, there cannot be uniform standards for all of the various units. So like I said, for example, you see that we say that there's no floors pricing for importers, for BIDEX. But we've done a floor pricing for oil marketing companies. You see, so all of them market petroleum products. But the uniqueness of importation versus the uniqueness of marketing will not allow you to set a uniform or consistent, if you want, pricing regime for all of them. So we look at all of the unique properties that they have for setting the kinds of rules that we set for them. For example, yesterday, we met with civil society organizations, and the issue of why, even though we are collecting licensing fees from special international oil trading companies and also BDCs in cedis, but why we are indexing what we collect in dollars, and yet we are, for the OMCs, we are just charging their licensing fees in cedis only. So we explained that for the BIDEC, for the import company, they do all of their business around the dollar, okay? So if you want to make, for ease of accounting and all of the calculations that go into what is the FOB price versus XRF price, plus supplier's premium, plus insurance, plus freight, and all of those things are done by these companies in dollars. And therefore, it's only wise that you don't distort that structure by introducing a CD fee component. So for them, you say, pay $2. In other words, pay the CD equivalent of $2. But when you come to ONC, you just say your license fee is 20,000 CDs per year. So I'm just citing these examples to say that we look at the unique operations of each of our publics and then use their uniqueness to set the licensing standards and procedures.
All right, Doc, thank you very much. I think your answer meets my expectation in terms of that, because I know that you have various segments, so that's fine. In respect of the local content, is there any guideline that is being drafted to provide direction on interpretation so that...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, finish your question. Okay, but I'm sorry I interjected.
No, that's okay.
But what I'm saying is that I've told you that the NPA Act, we are about to enact a new NPA Act, right?
Yes, please.
Now, LIs, I'm not a lawyer, you are. Your friend Faisal is. So he's also on the call, and he would correct me if I'm wrong. LIs are mostly formulated on the back of the parent law.
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. So really and truly, we haven't fleshed out the LI for operationalizing the local or Ghanaian content law, because if we did so now, based on the act that we are about to repeal, we would soon find that that LI also becomes redundant, or that it does not meet the philosophical and legal underpinnings of the new act that is about to be passed. So quite frankly, we are waiting to get the new act passed. And then when that is passed, we will then flesh out our LI. All the LIs that we have now in our sector, in respect of the processing and licensing, will all become, if you want, obsolete with the passage of a new act. So we are holding on that for now.
All right, thanks, Doc. I also want to find out from you what measures that you are putting in place to address fair competition within the sector.
To address
fair competition.
Fair competition.
Yes.
Oh, of course. So, like I said, so first of all, I have said that every 2 weeks, 2 weeks is what we have set for our pricing window. Okay, so as you know, in Ghana, when you go to the pumps today, Monday, a fortnight from now, you would have to go and see if the prices have changed, and etc. etc. Now, what our Economic Regulation Directorate does is that before a licensing window sets in or comes into place, we publish our projections, our pricing projection for the window. And we expect that when that window comes into effect, people will price their products within that range. And there are times that we have invited OMCs in particular. In my lifetime here, I haven't seen such invitations extended to BIDEX, but mostly to OMCs to come and answer why they are selling at a certain price, which we think is lower than will enable them to make a profit. Because quite frankly, no businesses are charities. All businesses are established for the purpose of making profit. And so if you are selling in a way or at a price that we think would collapse your business, then it just makes us feel that there's something fishy going on. That either your product is not from the right source, or you are dealing in a third-party operation, i.e., that another company lifted the product and then gave it to you to sell for whatever reason. And so we have sanctioned people and closed down their stations for selling at prices that we consider not profitable. And that's what motivated us to set a price floor when hitherto there was no price floor. So first of all, our publication of our projections for the week and also our constant monitoring. And that's why we require every service provider to display their prices at the pumps so that people know, and then our inspectors also have visibility, and then we can sanction people who try to undercut the sector.
One of the challenges that you would normally find is buy a petrol at a particular pump, probably 1,000 cedis, but you go to another pump, that same 1,000 will be more than what you're getting in a different pump. What people call it as adjustment of the is it the tank? I don't know how you call it.
Of the pump.
Of the pump. How do we address these growing concerns?
So the standards for the pump and amount of fuel that it should dispense per every liter and etc., those standards are set by the Ghana Standards Authority, right? However, the Ghana Standards Authority is part of the multi-stakeholder committee. You remember that I talked about a certain multi-stakeholder committee where all of these regulatory bodies, have a one-stop shop where we compare notes and etc. So we work closely with the Ghana Standards Authority to ensure that pumps are dispensing the right quantities. So Ghana Standards Authority has designed a 10-liter can, which is at every filling station. And every Ghanaian who feels that they have not been given the quantity of fuel that they actually bought is required to challenge the pump attendant and say, I invoke the 10-liter can in order to determine whether I was given the right quantity of fuel. In our Ghanaian folklore, there's something called Abrewa Kanukre. Even though the 10-liter can in the Akan language, they have named it Ntiasie Krowa. They have named it Ntiasie Krowa, which means that's what helps us to all come to an understanding that I was giving the right quantity of fuel that I bought. So you, lawyer, when you go to your nearest filling station next time, ask them, okay, even if you are satisfied, to test my theory, just go to the one by UPSC at the junction towards Atomic Junction and say, I feel cheated. Use the Ntiasie Krowa, let me see. And they are required to dispense 10 liters or into the can. And if it's full to the brim, then you are certain that you were actually giving the right quantity of fuel. But if they dispense 10 liters, because that the can, when it is full, is 10 liters. That's what it means. That when they dispense 10 liters, it reads 10 liters on the pump, but the can is not full, then you know that you have been shortchanged. And then you can report to NPA, and then we will apply the right sanctions. Sometimes well, most of the time, the station is closed, first of all. Ghana Standards Authority is invited to come and look at the calibration of the pumps. And then after that, a fine is imposed. So these are the things that we do in order to sanction and regulate the industry to ensure that people get value for their money.
All right. Thanks, Doc. You talked about the licensing regime, and I want to understand from your point of view, if I want to apply for license, is there any platform that I can start the process without necessarily having an interface with NPA? Because I know you have a lot of systemic effort to track the products, where they are located at the depots. But from the licensing regime, from the consumer point of view, what steps are you taking to ensure that if I need to apply for a license for whether BDC, I can start the process without necessarily coming to your place? Probably if I come, I'm just picking up the license.
Well, of course. So our licensing requirements are on our website, first of all. So if you require a license for any purpose whatsoever, what you need to do, first of all, is to go to the National Petroleum Authority website and then download license requirements. It's there. You click, you download. So it gives you all the license requirements. Then you gather all the documentation in respect of it. There's a processing fee. You go to the bank, you get your receipt for processing fee. You can scan all of these documents into a folder and email to the licensing directorate and say application for licensing and not appear here. But over the years, especially since I have been here, I've not seen anybody do that. People prefer to walk here and physically deliver the application. I mean, that may be another subject for an IT person or a sociologist, whether people do not necessarily trust that the documents that are electronically transmitted have been received, or somebody may say, I never got the email or something. So people prefer to come and give to an officer, they sign received, and then they are sure that their application was received, so that they are not getting responses. They have a remedy, or if you want, a remedy for complaint. So they do, but you can. So my answer to your question is that, yes, you can sit in your house, gather the documentation, photocopy all your documents, your receipts, and email to the licensing directorate. They will look at it, forward it to the licensing and technical committee of the board. The licensing and technical committee of the board meets, it looks at it. If it believes that you have satisfied all the requirements, it will send it to the board. And then the board would also look and finally grant an approval before the license is issued and signed by the chief executive. So this is the process for the acquisition of license.
Yes. Is the approval process tied to the number of board meetings that the board have? Or as and when you make an application, you'll receive an approval?
Oh, of course not. Of course it would. So first of all, I mean, as you know, for every board or in any statutory organization, it will say that the board should meet at least 4 times in a year. That's why they use the word at least. But a board meets as and when there is business to transact. Okay. And so if we have a number of applications sitting that require attention, the chief executive draws the attention of the chairman of the licensing and technical committee and say, I have applications sitting on my desk. Call a licensing and technical committee and look at them. So they do call when they feel that a reasonable number of applications have come in that ought to be looked at. So their meetings are not necessarily tied to when there is work to be done or whatever. They can meet at any point in time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Is there any restriction or moratorium at the moment for granting a license, maybe BDC, or is there any restriction at the moment, or when you apply, you're going to have it?
Well, if you apply and you meet the requirements, you will have it. But let me add that between, I think it was just basically in the year 2022, we suspended the issuance of both BDC and OMC licenses for the year 2022. Why we did that? Well, actually, it was under the instructions of the energy minister, who is the supervising minister over this authority. So the minister for energy determined, which is the truth of the matter, that Ghana's economy, he didn't think that we should have over 200 OMCs, for example. So he put a halt on the issuance of new OMC licenses, and then we had to do an audit of the licensing, of the licenses that are held by people. And then at the end of that audit process, about 46 licenses were revoked. So 46 companies' licenses were revoked because at that point, they no longer met, especially the infrastructure requirements for operating in the industry. But after we cleaned it up and everything, we opened the space again. So as of now, the space is open.
Thanks. Thanks for that. The sector is becoming, maybe I'm not using the right word, notorious for owing debt. I know the government, some monies were collected, VATs were actually collected and they were not paid. A lot of international arrangement to supply fuel to some of the BDCs in Ghana, non-payment of those BDCs as well. And one of the things that you have done very well is financial sustainability under your leadership. But I'm wondering whether you are looking at moving away from just infrastructure requirement and tying the entities to capital requirement, like what we have in the banks. So you can have a company having infrastructure requirement, but on the balance sheet, there's nothing to write them about. So is this something that maybe we should be thinking about it? Because otherwise we're giving ourselves a bad image as a country. I don't know whether my question is something that you understand.
Okay, I do. So I'm going back to a slide that I projected under general licensing requirements. And that's what is on your screen now. I said that as part of the requirements for getting a license here, you need a comprehensive 5-year detailed business plan detailing the following: business description, including the company's trading activities, history and capabilities, organization and management, risk analysis, market analysis, financial analysis, economic. And as part of all your financial analysis and economic analysis, you need to show a certain bank balance. You need some guarantee from a sound financial institution that you have this amount of money sitting with them that you are going to use for your business and so on and so forth. And we get you to give us these bank guarantees, not just say it, but you give us a guarantee so that if you come into the space and you are operating and you collect our taxes and our margins and you keep them and you don't pay, we can call on the bond, on the guarantee, on the bank guarantee to recoup what is owed to the government. So it's a major requirement for obtaining a license in this place.
Yeah, I perfectly understand that. But the challenge is that it's an ongoing business, okay? So a guarantee offered at the inception might not be as equivalent to the total outlay in the course of the business. So a typical vessel, which is shipped, might probably more than $40 million. And that's an ongoing obligation. So maybe we should think about, that's a suggestion. I mean, just a suggestion. We should think about tying them to capital requirement like the Bank of Ghana so that you can have a business do very well.
Yes, you require capital. For every license, I am not able now on this call to tell you top of head how much somebody looking for a BDC license has to show that they have sitting, is it 30? About 30 million, about 32 million United States dollars. You must prove that you have that to obtain a BDC license. And there's some amount also for OMCs and so on. Yes, so that it's part of the requirement. And then, of course, every year you renew your license anyway. So your guarantee is as good as 1 year. Basically, that's what it is. It's good for 1 year. And when you come to renew your license, you have to bring a new guarantee.
All right, so I'll ask last two questions, then we'll bring the curtains to a close. So I'm going to ask on safety issues. On safety issues. So I know you've been CEO for probably almost 4 years now.
Yes.
So in terms of safety, what are the major findings from the compliance review that has been done by NPA when you monitor this installation, petroleum installation? What are the common threats? Because I know that's very important in this space.
Yeah. So we have a directorate called the Risk Directorate. Before I came here, it wasn't a directorate, it was a department. But because of the value that I place on risk factors that could affect operations in the sector, I elevated the risk department to a directorate. And so every year we do a comprehensive risk survey and analysis of if the finances, the safety at our depots. The risk directorate actually go around the entire country and do an audit of all of these things. And then they point out areas of exposure, risk exposure. And then we then write to these people and say, look, we think that your exposure is high, or you have low exposure or moderate exposure, and therefore you take steps to mitigate your exposure. So that is constantly being done. We have a research, monitoring, and evaluation director, under which is also the business development department. Now, what we do with the business development department also is that even though it is under normal circumstances not our business to ensure that people are running their businesses well, like I said, if all of these businesses collapse, there will be no NPA. NPA exists because there are businesses to regulate. So we are normally very interested in how these businesses are run, such that they will become viable to pay us our license fee, so Sheila can get her daily bread. Okay. So our business department and the research monitoring evaluation organizes occasional workshops for businesses in our sector, OMCs, etc., on even bookkeeping practices. We bring their accountants, we bring their finance people together. Sometimes we bring their CEOs, even though, as I said, it normally shouldn't be our business. But we are interested because, look, many of them just take the money, oblivious of the fact that whatever somebody goes to buy at the pump includes government's money. It includes margins and levies and so on. And then they just take the money. Whatever they do with it, I don't know. In time, they are bankrupt. You mentioned that at the beginning of this call and said that you are aware that many OMCs owe. How come they owe? They only owe because they are taking more than their marketers' margin. That's the only reason they owe, which means they are taking the government's tax and not paying to the government. They are taking the levies and not paying. They are taking the margins and not paying. And oftentimes we find them running to the NPA and say, please give me, what do they call it here? A payment plan. And sometimes you say, okay, you go and bring me your payment plan, how you intend to pay off your debt. And they'll bring you a payment plan for 5 years. As chief executive, I don't have 5 years sitting here. So how am I supposed to give you a payment plan that would outlive my life here at the NPA? And it becomes problematic. So we are interested certainly in helping them to run an efficient business that would also deliver the government's taxes and our margins and our levies to us. So we do all of that.
Thank you, Doug. My final question borders on ESG. This is a concept which is quite prevalent. So I want to understand from you what steps you're taking to balance the environmental sustainability with economic demands in the petroleum sector.
Well, so I just talk to you about the risk. Incidentally, it was just 2 weeks ago at our director's retreat that I got the director risk to do a whole presentation of our ESG framework or policy and how we dovetail ESG into all of the various segments of our operation here at the NPA. In fact, just this morning, the director audit also came to me and said that they've gotten an expert who wants to come again into the authority in the course of this year, before this year runs out, to give us a 2-day training. Unfortunately for me, he says it's for free. We don't have to pay. On how to really make our ESG policy like top priority in the way that we operate in this place. So without being very specific, I will say that from everything that I've been saying this morning, you would see that we are very sensitive to the social environment in the way that we operate, including even our corporate social responsibility policy that says that in areas where we are operating, in our various catchment areas, we should be interested in the welfare of the people and how they relate to the infrastructure. And so, for example, if you take the Centio refinery, where it is, we're able to get the chiefs, the community, and everybody to understand the social impact of the refinery on their community and how they should relate with the presence of that refinery in their community, and etc., etc. I've already spoken also about the governance issues and measures in respect of governance that we have introduced every step of the way when there has been a crisis, how we even tweak our laws and introduce government interventions in order to further people's businesses and protect people's businesses and so on. So the summary of my answer to you is that yes, ESG is at the heart of the way that we do things here at the NPA.
Dr. Amin, thank you very much. My apologies, but I need to ask one more question. A very special key stakeholder in your industry has posted a question in the chat box, so I have to. So he is of the view that credit risk is a major issue in the industry. Yes. And many of the OMCs fail to pay because they are also owed by businesses and sometimes government contractors. Yes. So we would like to know from you what NPA is doing to manage overall credit risk within the industry.
So yes, so you talked about credit risk. That's very crucial for us because, like I said, if all of these companies are indebted and they collapse under the weight of their indebtedness, then NPA also ceases to exist. So we've set up here what we call a receivables committee, okay? And this receivable committee is made up of people from the legal directorate, people from finance, people from audit, I think security and intelligence, where their business is basically a constant interaction with companies that we deem as, if you want, whose risk profile, in our opinion, in our judgment, is high, and to constantly, for want of a better term, babysit them, if you want, to ensure that at any point in time, their credit risk is on the low and that they can deliver whatever taxes and margins and so on that they have to pay to us. I must also add that there is a certain carrot and stick approach that we adopted recently, where we also brought in IOCO to say that, look, sometimes we need an institution that puts the fear of God in people so that they can do the right things. And then we have had IOCO also come in and basically place calls to companies and let them know that they will be committing economic crimes to the state if they were not to set up and pay the right taxes and margins and levies to the government and so on and so on. And all of that combination has helped. And I must add that since I came, we've collected nearly 70% of what was owed the authority before I came here in 2021. So basically, that's what I can say about mitigating credit risk in the industry.
Thank you, Doc, for such an insightful presentation. On behalf of the UKPPC, on behalf of the Executive Director, Achoba, and the team, we are grateful for making time to share with us perspective from your seat. We are very much grateful for making time for us. Allah should bless you and give you your heart desires in the coming weeks. So thank you very much once again. And
thank you very much.
We'll bring the curtains to a close.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. UK, Ghana Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.